All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. Have you ever looked at a breathtaking sunset with a friend? Or maybe watched a really intense movie together, only to realize later on that they were focusing on something completely different? It's a wild realization, right? We go through life assuming that just because we're standing in the same room, looking at the exact same scenery, we're experiencing the exact same world. But here is the fascinating truth. No two people see the exact same world, not even close. Today we're going to explore the surprising science and psychology behind why that is, and how reframing our understanding of the human brain can completely change how we see each other.
So, to really kick things off, we need to challenge a massive assumption we literally make every single day. We assume a shared reality. We have to ask ourselves, why do two people in the exact same place feel completely different emotions? I mean, think about it. You could have two people sitting at the exact same lively dinner party. One person is having the absolute time of their life, completely energized by the music and the chatter. The other person is sitting right next to them, looking at the exact same faces, hearing the exact same sounds, but feeling entirely overwhelmed and just desperate to leave. Same exact inputs, fundamentally different emotional outputs. How does that happen? Where does this absolute disconnect in the human experience actually come from?
Okay, so the crucial point here is that we are all, every single one of us, navigating life wearing these unique, invisible glasses. Now, when we look at each other, we immediately accept physical differences, right? We see different heights, different eye colors, different hair. That's obvious. But what we so often forget is that our internal wiring, the fundamental design of our brains, is just as biologically unique as our fingerprints. These invisible glasses aren't something you can just take off at the end of the day. They are permanently attached to us, acting as a completely unique filter constructed not just from our memories and how we were raised, but from the innate biological design of our brains from the moment we're born. Every single piece of information you take in passes through this specific, totally individualized filter before you even realize it.
Actually, let's try a little perspective flip to really grasp this. I want you to imagine just for a second a world where you are the only person strictly following the rules. You've always tried your absolute best to do things the right way, to fit in, to match the pace of society. But suddenly, you wake up one day and you realize that out of everyone around you, you're the only one still walking in that straight line. Everyone else has completely changed the game. How would you feel? You'd feel completely isolated, right? Suddenly, even though you're doing exactly what you've always been told is correct, you are the one who looks completely out of place. You become the odd one out, simply because the environment around you operates on a completely different frequency.
And you know what? This brilliantly illustrates something we almost never admit out loud. Normal is literally just the behavior of the majority. That's really it. Normal is just a numbers game. It's actually pretty funny when you think about it. We place so much weight on common sense or acting normal, as if these concepts have some sort of absolute universal authority. But they don't. There is no supreme judge of societal correctness. The concept of common sense is merely established because people who happen to think somewhat similarly make up the majority of the population in that specific place. If someone thinks a little differently, they aren't inherently broken or failing to adapt. They just don't happen to be part of that dominant statistical group.
When we look at how this plays out across different cultures, the contrast is, well, it's pretty staggering. Take Japan, for instance. There's a massive emphasis on group conformity and shared common sense. You'll often hear people casually dismiss things that fall outside the norm as defying common sense, because falling in line with the group is deeply ingrained as the default setting. But contrast that with the author's experience of living in America for 17 years. In all that time, they rarely heard the phrase common sense used in that rigid way to enforce conformity. In fact, it was the exact opposite. If you were sitting in a room in the US and didn't have an individual opinion to voice, if you just went along with the crowd for the sake of it, that was what people considered highly unusual. The cultural expectation just flipped completely.
Let's put this into a real-world context, right? Because this cultural gap creates massive misunderstandings every single day. Consider a non-native speaker sitting in a fast-paced international meeting. They're perfectly quiet. Why? Well, maybe they're feeling a bit insecure about their language skills. But inside their head, it is an absolute whirlwind of activity. The gears are turning rapidly. They're actively analyzing every single word of the discussion, breaking down complex arguments, and maybe even forming the most brilliant solution in the entire room. But because there's a language barrier causing them to hesitate, their outward behavior is just silence. And the real tragedy is, they might be entirely, wrongly judged by their colleagues as not thinking or simply not participating. The visible output completely masks the intense internal reality.
The author of our source material, who navigates Japanese society with developmental traits, intimately understands this total disconnect. They describe this burning, silent desire to scream at the world, "Understand my thoughts properly."
It's an incredibly powerful sentiment, and it's not a request for special treatment. Not at all. It's simply a profound plea for accurate understanding. It's a demand for society to stop making sweeping, damaging assumptions based exclusively on what is visible on the surface. We do this all the time, don't we? We see someone acting differently, and we immediately write the narrative of why they're doing it without ever stopping to consider that their invisible glasses are showing them a completely different reality than ours.
Now notice the incredible power of the words we use to describe these differences. The way we frame things linguistically literally shapes society's entire approach to the human mind. In Japan, the common term used translates to developmental disorder. Think about the instant psychological impact of that word, disorder. It instantly implies a brokenness, a defect, something that has gone wrong and desperately needs fixing. But look at the English concept of neurodiversity. This framework starts from an entirely different premise. It treats neurodivergence as a natural human variation, much like biodiversity in nature. It's not a malfunction, it's just a different operating system that simply needs the right environment to run smoothly. Words hold immense world-building power. I mean it. When you grow up in a society that uses that disorder framework, a very specific and frankly damaging cycle takes root. First, a child or an adult is labeled as broken or different from the norm. Then, they are constantly instructed by well-meaning teachers, parents, or society at large to just fix themselves, to try harder to fit into the standard mold. Imagine the absolute psychological toll of being told every single day that the fundamental way your brain naturally processes the world is just wrong. It is exhausting. What inevitably happens is that a deep self-denial and a complete loss of confidence takes root. The individual starts believing they're inherently flawed and their self-worth is entirely destroyed.
Conversely, and this is where things get really exciting, let's look at what happens when you apply a neurodiversity framework, especially in the workplace. Imagine a manager who genuinely understands brain differences, sitting down with an employee and saying, "You have outstanding creativity. Pitch me ideas and I'll do the organizing." Wow, right? Think about how absolutely liberating that is. Instead of forcing the employee to struggle with tasks their brain simply isn't wired for, the manager fosters immense confidence and success. They design the role around the person's specific brain design and strengths. The employee gets to live in their zone of genius, the company gets brilliant ideas, and the so-called weaknesses are covered by a different team member whose invisible glasses make them amazing at organizing.
So if you take nothing else away from this, here's the absolute core thesis we need to internalize. Traits, natural variations in how a human brain is wired, only become a disorder when the environment refuses to accept them. Let me just say that again. These natural differences only morph into massive, insurmountable obstacles when individuals are forced into environments that are entirely unsuited for them. It's like if a flower isn't blooming, you don't blame the flower, you fix the environment. You change the soil, you adjust the light. The exact same applies to human beings. The disorder isn't necessarily located inside the person, it's located in the friction between the person and an inflexible environment.
Interestingly, it's worth pointing out that even in America, the medical terminology still contains that tricky word. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit/Hyperactivity Disorder, but the surrounding cultural context makes a world of difference. In the US, driven largely by a culture of individualism and self-advocacy, people can be remarkably open and unapologetic about their diagnosis. It's often viewed less as a dark secret to be hidden away and more as just another facet of their identity. Like, hey, I have ADHD. This is how I work best. That level of openness allows people to ask for the accommodations they need without intense shame, which drastically reduces that friction between the individual and their environment. To really see this dynamic in action, the authors shared this absolutely amazing story from back when they were living in the United States. I love this anecdote. They joined a 5-piece music band. Now, in this band, there were 2 vocalists, and both of them openly shared that they had ADHD traits. They didn't hide it, they were totally upfront about how their brains worked, sometimes even casually showing the medication they took. It was just a normal part of the band's dynamic, entirely accepted, and they just focused on making great music together.
Now, fast forward 26 years. The author is looking back on their life, and this massive, staggering realization hits them. Wait for it. He was actually the 3rd member with ADHD in that 5-piece band. Without even realizing it at the time, this incredibly concentrated group of neurodivergent individuals had organically found each other. Statistically speaking, that is wild. 3 out of 5 members in a random band setup sharing these traits. It wasn't planned, it wasn't a support group, they were literally just musicians who naturally gravitated toward each other's energy and communication styles.
And honestly, here is the beautiful takeaway from that realization. Despite looking through vastly different invisible glasses, they didn't need to conform to a single standard to create something incredibly cohesive and successful. They didn't have the exact same brain wiring, but they made beautiful music together. In fact, having those different invisible glasses likely meant they were hearing and interpreting different layers of the music. One might have been hyper-focused on the rhythmic drive, another visualizing the melodic structure, resulting in a much richer, more dynamic final product than if they all thought exactly the same way.
This band, it just perfectly encapsulates the true beauty of neurodiversity. As the author so wonderfully puts it, making music together isn't about having the same brain, but about playing your own unique sound. That is such a powerful philosophy for life, isn't it? True harmony in society isn't achieved by forcing everyone to read the exact same sheet music and play the exact same notes. That just creates a monotone drone. True harmony, the kind that moves us, the kind that drives innovation and connection, is achieved by letting each person freely play their own authentic sound, knowing that it will perfectly complement the whole.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a question to chew on. We all have our own invisible glasses. We all have our own unique brain design. So what unique sound will you bring to the harmony? Don't try to mute yourself to fit into someone else's idea of normal. The world doesn't need more of the same notes. Understand your lens, embrace your specific sound, and let it ring out loud and clear.